Welcome to the Botanical Gardens. I'm your host, Amanda George, and today I've got a special guest. So, Matt, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Matt Agnew, and I am a marketer by accident, it seems, my career. So I've been in the SaaS and the tech world, and recently I've defined myself as a vertical SaaS marketer.
Awesome. Now, for the audience that doesn't understand what vertical marketing is, could you explain what that is?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, vertical marketing is essentially when you work in one specific area. So, for example, right now, I work for a software company that provides software for art galleries and only art galleries. So, it's something that's very specific, very focused, rather than something that can work for several different areas or several different markets.
Now, I think the interesting thing as software has become so advanced and there's different types of software available, vertical marketing seems to be the big trends. But you and I had a brief discussion prior to getting on this call where we talked about how nuanced marketing has become. I think one of the things that's really difficult for most people when they think about marketing is where do you get started? And it's always a fun question. You mentioned that you accidentally got into marketing. Do you mind sharing that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a degree in English writing and creative nonfiction. So it's a bit of a strange thing, and like a lot of us in that field and in those kind of creative pursuits, we often end up in marketing. So I had applied for a job that was looking for a writer, and it was looking for script writers for they were just getting into YouTube videos, and so we were looking for that, and then this was a company that would just kind of go nuts and throw people around, see what people could do, and I emerged on the other side of that as a product marketer. So I eventually was tasked with learning about the newer products, making sure I understood what the audience wanted. And at the time, I didn't even know if I understood that what I was doing was product marketing, but it was. And it was then taking that information to the team to make sure that we're speaking the language we need to speak. And then making sure that everything about the product, from pricing to packaging to, where it fit in people's space, everything from that, eventually kind of fell on me, and I end up loving it, and I really, really love that aspect of marketing where it's making sure you understand what the pain point is and then making sure you know how to speak to it.
And I love that you mentioned pain point because you and I both seem to have done pre-sales in our lifetime. I'm finding there's quite a bit of similarities between pre-sales and marketing right now, and especially within product marketing. I actually study public relations, which is not a very common course. And like you, I think a lot of our courses are disappearing as, technology takes over and is changing things. One of my first jobs actually was transcribing broadcast audio into written text. Now AI can do that for you. Fast forward my marketing career and PR career, I spent the first 3 years of it within that space and then was giving a talk about why companies should get onto social media marketing. And this was back in 2010. So a headhunter happened to hear me speak and was like, "Hey, I've got this role. Do you think you'd be interested in it?" I said, "Sure, let's give it a try." And that's kind of how I ended up in pre-sales. But I've always had a little bit of a technical background. I took coding camps in school where it was basic computing, so learning how to type properly, then basic HTML, which then brought me into Java and every other programming language as an introduction. But you and I had a very interesting discussion around sort of processes that product marketing tries to enforce and sales process and the intersection of both of those things. I think one of the things that's really interesting, especially when you're in such a dedicated vertical space, is not forcing a process onto a customer. What's your thoughts on that?
That's my number one thing, and it's a lesson that one of the first lessons I learned that I never forgot about. So this first job that I mentioned was they had this sales process that would have, so somebody who was interested in their product, they would call the company. And this was in 2011, where and the easiest way was to pick up the phone and call for some reason still. They'd call the company, someone would answer, and then they would transfer it to a junior person who would ask a few questions and then say, someone will get back to you. Then they would hang up. And then someone like me would call, ask another set of questions, and then hang up. And then pass it on to a salesperson who would then come on, ask another set of questions, and then hopefully in that meeting do the demo. So realistically, they could have had a good idea of what the product was. They could have heard about it from someone else. We had videos, we had information on the website. They could just be coming for pricing and to get things going, but we made them go through this multi step process that would end up taking 2 weeks. You could have closed it that day. The company wanted it to do it that way because the company felt it was the most beneficial to the company because they felt, that we can get this information, that we could assign which sales rep to do it, and then the sales reps will behave because they're going to want the good leads because they know they're qualified first. And nobody at any point said, "Is this annoying to the customer?" And if they did, nobody cared, and it was very frustrating.
No, I totally understand it. And I think one of my biggest struggles as a product marketer now that I'm back on this side of the fence and not in sales is exactly that. It's forcing a process, it's forcing all of these things. Especially with AI and personalization, I think it's very interesting when you are creating sales collateral for sales enablement with an email template, a demo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whatever else your sales team needs to align it to their Salesforce process and their sales methodology, whether it's Medic, Bant, Chandler, Sandler, name it, they probably have something. I think where it gets really annoying for the customer is that we live in a time and age where they know what it is that they need and want. So us forcing all of these different steps and including that email is really hard to get a hold of anyone. I think this is where personalization and persona work and product marketing really gets to shine, especially in the age of AI. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on sort of the persona development today and how it's impacting sales process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you get this idea that sometimes people get stuck on a way. They had some success doing something a certain way, so like we have to keep doing it. And you mentioned you don't use email as much. A lot of these older people, kind of they email was very successful for them and they love it. And so everything should be email. It should always be email. And in certain markets, that could actually be incredibly detrimental to you. Like, in China, they use WeChat, for to communicate for a lot of things, like for business things. And even a lot of business now is happening over WhatsApp. And that might sound strange. And some people might even think, what? You're doing business over WhatsApp? But it's happening a lot now, and you have to adapt to that. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you need to communicate with them that way, but understanding that maybe that's how they communicate with their customers. And that's a really, really important thing. And that's a really big shift that people don't understand. And it's that, again, it's not about forcing them to do it the way I want to do it, right? It's understanding what they're doing and going that way. So yeah, it's all about understanding the person at the end of the day. One of the really interesting things at my job, so we're marketing towards art galleries, and one of the first things I noticed that was really tricky was these are not desk people. These are not people that are at their desk that are sitting, we're going to respond to an email quickly, that are comfortable sitting for an hour-long demo. And then once you get them, the chances of getting them again, it's very, very difficult. So you have to do a lot in 15 minutes. And normally the process would say don't do that, right? The process would say do a discovery, go back, get some information, come back, book, do one demo, do another demo, do a third demo. Like that's what the process would say. It is not going to work with these people. You have to hook them very early. You have to tell them why another meeting is worth their time. And you have to answer as many of their questions as you can right away for them to continue to be interested. And because also these are people with very short attention spans because they're doing 5 jobs and a million things are coming up. So it's like while you're talking to them, a shipment got delayed and didn't come in. Their framer didn't come in that day. Somebody, a incredibly wealthy person just walked in the front door. Like it's these things that doesn't necessarily exist in a lot of the other spaces that I've marketed to. And so that was really number one for persona, is like understanding that and understanding how these people act and adjusting things for that. So it took me a little bit, but it's really changed a lot of the ways I do things.
Yeah. And you mentioned a couple of interesting things because I think there's a lot of focus on demos and products right now. And sometimes folks know what it is that they need, don't need, and it doesn't make sense to go through a full demo. If you are going to go through that process of qualifying, discovery, et cetera, however many steps you need to get through, does it always make sense to show every aspect of a product? No. And I think this, people know what a button does. People know what, UIs look like now, user interfaces. But at the same time, I think there's this huge focus on a lot of process still. But the interesting thing you said too was people that we're selling to today are busy. And especially with all the layoffs kind of happening across every industry
Yeah.
as we see it, it is getting ridiculously difficult to get someone's attention, including mine. I love when I get the email from a sales rep that says, "Hey, I see that you're in product marketing and you do X, Y, and Z." I was like, wow, you seem to know what I do better than I do. And any product marketer you talk to, our roles are completely different. Some are more campaign heavy, some are more product heavy, some are a little bit more demand heavy. It really does change based on the product marketer that you're trying to talk to. So I think when it comes to these persona types, whoever's writing them for product marketing, please go and try and understand what product marketers do and what our day-to-day tasks are because it varies from person to person. So I always find that a little bit difficult. And, I love that you shared the art gallery story because I used to sell computerized maintenance management software, which is not very sexy. We're selling software to technicians who are turning wrenches and banging things. If they're lucky, they're using handwritten notes to then input something into a computer. It is quite difficult to get a hold of these people. When I switched from being a solutions engineer into product marketing, one of the things that I started analyzing was all of the data in our system. So within our own software that we were selling, I could see that the time that people were most active and logging into our software was actually on a Sunday. I didn't expect that. So instead of sending an email, what I ended up doing was customizing those emails to be sent on Sunday or even notifications within the system, because that's when I know they were sitting down and actually had time to do their administrative tasks. During the week, like you said, something can pop up. A machine might go down. They have to go fix that issue, so there's no downtime. And I think with the amount of data that people have within their own systems, I find that there still is a gap in terms of what product marketers look at in terms of the data sets that are there. It's not just the marketing data. For me, I think I also take into account customer data. So
Mhm.
CSMs or customer support managers, they sit on a wealth of data that helps me as a product marketer as well. Same with support teams, professional services, sales, and even product. I find it very interesting when I'm, talking to other product marketers that they're so focused on just campaign and demand for the most part that they're almost neglecting the part of their title that says product marketing manager. How are you kind of finding the landscape in terms of data and what people are looking at? Or are you finding that product marketing is still predominantly trying to figure out where it fits within a marketing org? Because this is becoming a heavy debate on LinkedIn from what I can see.
Yeah, I mean the traditional Venn diagram of product marketing is that there's sales, marketing, product, and then product marketing is kind of in the middle, touching all of them evenly. And then different organizations that can kind of be true, but realistically, every single bubble of the company should be there. And I honestly mean every single bubble, like even finance and admin, because there's so many. I think it's so important that every single person of the company knows what marketing is doing and that every single person at the company can give a quick elevator pitch of what's happening because you never know who you're talking to. Like if you're still at a physical office, you never know who's coming in. It's a very important thing. And I've seen this where, somebody walks in and they bump into somebody and they don't really know what to say because they see themselves, I'm the IT guy, but they should have be able to comfortably say it. And another thing I always say is if your company is given 30 seconds to give a pitch about the company, what the product does, or for the fate of the world, it should be the product marketer. That should do that, and that's because that person has touched so many different areas, and should have the ability to speak to both a technical and a non-technical audience at the same time and get it out in the quickest way. So like I always like to challenge myself with that. Like I always say, whether anyone wants me to or not, I want to be able to give the best demo of the product. I think the product marketer should own the demo of the product. So it's all about, yes, using all that data and understanding it, but it's also that balance of, again, the most important thing to never forget is it's who you're talking to. I once had the same one of my very first jobs. I was doing technical writing, and we had this 200-page document, and this company had paid $10,000 for this assessment of all their IT stuff, and we were literally just about to hit send and give it to them when somebody said, this is going to the principal of a school, right? And it was all these giant technical nerds that had worked on it, and we were literally about to hit send, and we're like, he's not going to understand a word of this. So it was very early on, and I said, let's make an executive summary that, we can sum all this up in a very colorful dashboard. And so we made the first 2 pages for that person, and then the rest, if a a technical person wanted to see it, it was there for them, and that was exactly what he needed, and he completely was able to understand his IT in a very short way, because it's, oh, this is red, this is bad, I have to address this. This is green, I probably can ignore this right now, and it totally worked.
And you bring up a great point too, because there is a massive difference, or at least I think there is, between B2B, B2C, and B2D. B2D, which is kind of new, business to developer, is a very different ball game compared to B2B selling. In that the example that you provided with technical writers, that is something that works well for B2D, but not B2B per se. There's someone who's just an end user, and then there's someone who needs to implement the system. I'm finding that with software, it's a combination of both B2B and B2D marketing, depending on which side of the fence that you're sitting on. How do you see that kind of changing in the future? Because everyone's becoming AI centric, but the AI conversation isn't really predominantly a software thing. At least in my mind, I don't think so. A lot of AI that needs to be implemented is either on the infrastructure side or somebody needs to build out those agents or build out a component to make it usable for the end users. Therefore, you're now getting into much more technical conversations than you typically would have previously with SaaS solutions. What are you kind of noticing in that space?
I think there is going to be a massive change, and I think it's and again, I don't mean to be ageist. I'm going to sound like an ageist again, but a lot of the traditionally developers hated software because they would build it themselves, right? It was, and that's my experience with developers. That it's, why would I buy something? I'll just get to build it myself, and I understand it. And that happened a ton. And then what we started realizing was everything was dependent on this person. So this person left, no one knew how to use it, no one knew how to update it, and it became this massive, massive problem for a lot of companies. But now I'm really seeing a lot of the younger, more AI focused IT folks are completely willing to look at software. I work at a 14-person company. We have a ton of software. That's what allows us to be small, because we have all this software, and it comes from our technical people that traditionally you would think, they built the product we're selling, but they love bringing things in to solve problems. And I think that's sort of the newer way, that instead of, I'm going to build something to fix this problem, I'm going to see what's out there to fix this problem, and see if and I want to see if it works well, because then it's faster, it's easier to update, and then you just don't get a lot of these headaches if somebody leaves that are owning it. And it's funny how much that's still a problem. That I remember talking to a company where they would build these process automations, and these are giant companies, like giant companies. And if the person that built that automation would leave, they would throw it away. And that's so much money waste, and it really defeated the entire purpose of it, because it was something that was there to save time, and then they would have to spend months having someone else have to build it. And I can't tell you how many developers I've talked to where they said the first 6 months of they were at a company was just trying to figure out what the last guy did. So I think that idea of building something yourself is really going to go away, and it really is going to be more about these. There's still going to be these AI agents and things that people are building, but it's going to be pre-existing software that more people understand, and even some of the non-technical folks can run and do things. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
Absolutely. And on my other podcast, Maker to Market, I talk quite a bit about that with entrepreneurs. And it's really not that surprising because what's new is old, what's old is new. Everything is coming full circle again. I think every company has been through the SaaS burnout where they had all these over promising and under delivering of various SaaS solutions. And then you do the integrations into the cloud. But then there's a lot of companies that, have on-prem solutions or hybrid solutions, and those require a very different technical set of skills. There is a massive growing space of cloud front end, development. But at the end of the day, every organization is still going back to their legacy systems. It's now building connectors for those ERPs, those CRMs that exist out there, and all of the older pieces. And I want to not be ageist, but unfortunately, I really do have to be ageist. I think it's part of how I also utilize that, the age groups to address someone as well because it is a very different conversation when you're talking to someone who's well experienced versus a junior developer. And like you said, I think a lot of the newer developers that are entering the market, it's a common complaint. I don't know what the last guy did. There is no onboarding for developers. There's no, change documentation in a lot of organizations that say, hey, this was the process that was changed, this was done, that connected to this system, etc. I would hate to be sitting there reviewing someone's old code and trying to figure out what did it connect to, where did it go wrong, what am I supposed to do? Even though AI is trying to solve for some of this, it's still not great. It's great at developing new code, but it's not good at assessing old legacy code and its intricacies of where it's connected to and what it's supposed to do. So, doesn't surprise me that much, but again, this is where the conversation gets really interesting with technology right now, is that from an ageist perspective, you've got someone with that legacy knowledge that cannot be replaced by AI. These are the people that built those systems that are hard to connect to and the on-prems and the hybrids that we're working with. Newer developers, I find, are very focused on cloud and AI solutions, which is great, but it's just one component of the overarching technical ecosystem that someone's in.
You know what? Another really interesting aspect that just made me think of was, what used to be like the bane for IT was shadow IT, right? That it was people going out and coming up with their own things. And if you think about it, shadow IT is really what has set this AI world, aflame. It's really what started it all. If you look back to it, because what it used to be was, again, I'm gonna age myself now. It used to be, your work computer was crap, and there was nothing you could do about it, and the system wasn't comfortable. And to save something, you had to go open up 10,000 folders and drop it somewhere, or open up this weird looking SharePoint thing. And that's just what it was. And people accepted it, right? That it was, like ERP systems never cared about user experience. It was just, we're telling you to do this. It's super complicated. We don't care. We're the old millennials, us. Like, so we started it. We're like, well, I don't want to, so I'm going to use Dropbox because it's easier. I know you don't want me to. And IT originally tried to cancel it and stop all that, and eventually they realized we're not going to stop it. And then everything started getting cleaner. Everything started getting easier. Microsoft and other companies started making the things, realizing that, user experience is important. If we don't make it easy to use, they're going to go find something else. I think, look at WebEx. Like, WebEx learned the hard way. Like, they were kind of the biggest one, and Zoom came along and was the easiest thing in the world to use. And WebEx is like, kind of did that blockbuster thing of, no, people are still going to like us. They're going to like clicking the 9,000 buttons to open up one window, and then it didn't work, and no one, I can't tell you the last time I used WebEx. And we're realizing that it's all because of Shadow T, and that's what's happening with these developers. And that, as a marketing person, that's super, super, super important to understand. Because things that are easy in our life, we expect that at work now. And that what didn't used to be the case. It was you used to know that your work computer was, or your home computer was better than your work computer, you just accepted it. We don't accept that anymore.
Yeah. You mentioned Microsoft. I'm not loving the Copilot changes. I think it's added a few more clicks that I don't need right now. It makes me cry a little bit. But you're right. I think, what started off, and this is a great segue into some of the sustainability conversation too. A lot of things have changed ever since access to everybody has kind of become a more available thing. People are now able to voice their concerns. If you're a product marketer and you're not listening to any of these, then what are you really doing? And if it's not the product marketing group, it's got to be your product org. If people are going online and saying, oh my God, Copilot is so much more difficult to use, you've added 4 more steps to get to my OneDrive folder,
Mhm.
which is exactly what they've done. Did you make life better or easier? And, bringing up the millennial aspect of it, we do expect things to be easier. And I don't think it's that difficult of an ask, but again, the ageism piece here, there's a cohort that don't think that it's that important, but it is. If my, solutions that I'm being provided with at work are hindering my performance, how do I go and tell IT this? Because I'm going to be completely honest, there's a lot of things I cannot do easily in Microsoft 365 and any of their products that I find much easier to do in G Suite just because it's already there. It does it automatically. I don't
Huge
even have to use
problem.
my
Because,
brain.
yeah.
I think the interesting part too is when we talk about availability of information to everyone, this is where AI gets really interesting for me because messaging and positioning is getting very, very bland, I would say. That's the word I'm choosing to use. Everyone's messaging is starting to sound the same. Everyone has a level of AI in their solution. What's the core differentiator between a lot of these products? I'm not seeing it. But going back to the competitive intelligence piece as well, there's no good way of researching how someone's user interface and interactions are actually differentiating. Because I think that's a big component of what I'm looking for when I'm actually reviewing software now. I don't know about yourself. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely. And so I had a role where I was a product marketer, but also a product owner. And so I would review a lot of solutions, and this was at a managed service company, and then we would package it and sell it as a service. Sell the software and then also like a service around it. And one of the things that I always had on my checklist was the familiarity. And what I would do was, I don't want to. This is going to sound really mean, but I would take. Let's say this in the most diplomatic way possible. The first thing I would do was I would go to the four most headstrong, difficult, non-techie people in the office, and I would show it to them, and I would give it to them, and I would say, "You use this." What happens then is if these people don't like it, they say, "No, I'm not using it." And then that kind of trickles, and then there's a problem because and then these are all people that were kind of pillars in spaces. So then, like, if someone needs to send them something, if they're not using it, it could cause a problem. So that was one of the first things I would do was kind of I really care the most about the usability and the experience of it. So I would always do that. And that's huge for me. And then what I really have come to look at is, kind of that familiar feel. You want something to kind of look like G Suite or kind of look like Word, but with less buttons, like the Microsoft stuff. But you want it, you want your submit button to be where the submit button's supposed to be. Like that's incredibly, incredibly important. And I think companies are getting better at that. I do. I do. It's just, one thing is you talked about, there's layoffs and companies are shrinking. The UX designer seems to be one of the first to go sometimes in the organization layoffs, and it's showing. It shows sometimes. Like
Yeah.
especially when companies don't have that. Like that's a frustrating thing. Like there's one thing in my product now. Like I think our product, the company I work for, Eternal, is really good and it makes a lot of sense. But there are times where I'm not sure where to click, and I push for that, and I push and say, guys, like let's move this, or let's move this button here, or why did I have to? I didn't expect to click there. Like I thought I should click there, and I kind of put myself at the if this is tech and this is non-tech, I think I'm here, So like I kind of understand both. So if I am having a hard time with it, I think everyone over here is having a worse hard time with it. So I do kind of see myself as that litmus test of user experience. Like if I think it's difficult or not intuitive, I honestly think it should be changed. I don't know if that sounds cocky, but we expect things the way we want it. I mean, I talked to you about, in our home life, like one of the things that's ruined me with, this expectation is things like Uber Eats and Uber in general. Like you could have a car at your house with two buttons. Like I literally, or you can order a meal that you've ordered before with one click. And I want that in my real life, So I said, the best pizza place in my town isn't on Uber, and I actually have to pick up the phone and call, and it's awful, and I won't do it. And so, and that's so companies have to be thinking like that, right? Like if it's hard, people are going to move on to the next thing. If that button isn't where it is, and they don't have patience for you to say, "Oh, that's coming out in 5 cycles, and so that'll be there." After it's user tested, they don't have patience for that anymore. They're going to go to the person that has that button there. So UX is the most important thing companies should be doing.
Absolutely. And I think there's like a great set of solutions out there that help with user testing as you go through beta testing with customers, which is a whole nother conversation we can go down. But I love that you brought up the Uber example. I'm always the outlier in every conversation when it comes to these types of things. I actually really hate Uber. Like,
Yeah.
I really do. Even Instacart and any of the delivery services that we have. One of the things that kind of came up in my sustainability courses was, the nuance of how easy these things have made our lives. But
Mhm.
then you think about it from the flip side, and this is me, I think I like to look at both sides of the coin here. But yes, Uber created a lot of job opportunities for people, but no one really aspires to be a driver or a delivery person, etc. The thing that drives me nuts about it now, when it first came out, it was absolutely great. You had people that cared about picking up your products. And I didn't have a car at the time, so it was the solution of choice. But there are safety concerns with this stuff as well, especially being a female. You do have to worry about these things a little bit more than others. Whether my delivery person is going to try and hit on me and then ask for a number. It's like, okay, like just drop the groceries and leave. Thanks. But the other thing that I'm finding is that quality has really suffered over time. I think with the sheer amount of people that have now signed up because of loss of jobs in the overall market, there's now more Uber drivers, more Uber delivery, more delivery people across multitudes of apps, and the care has gotten down. So quality is really suffering because of this as well. So the thing that I find very interesting with AI as well is that it's almost enabled me to take back a lot of the things that I find where quality is suffering. So for example, even just personal assistance. Siri is now my best friend for personal assistance. I don't even need a person for it. Same thing with me just planning my time. It's actually insane how much I talk to my computer and my phone now to say like, "Hey Siri, do I have an hour on Friday to go grocery shopping?" Yes? No? Okay, great. I'm going to schedule that in and then I'm going to use that time to go. So it's helping me manage my time a lot better. But I think where it gets really interesting too is a lot of people have this fear of AI replacing them, and I don't think it's ever going to fully replace people, especially within marketing. There seems to be this sort of understanding or sort of, scare of, well, if I don't have this knowledge, and I think this comes to the ageism part again, there's a massive cohort that thinks that, okay, my knowledge is so esoteric. It really isn't. Everybody has access to the same knowledge now. And this is where it gets difficult as a marketer. We talked about the UI aspect of it, the technical components of it as well. We talked about, you kind of touched the subject of different solutions and UI. The other component to that conversation is now speed, because I'm finding there is a nuance in terms of speed and reliability among solutions.
It can be frustrating, but I do think it's almost like a recency bias of like it really is better than it used to be. There used to be a lot more downtime with things, and it used to get in the way, and you would not have something for days. And most things come back faster. I mean, yes, there are the outliers where there's things, but I do, yeah, like I think that's you kind of are speaking to the Uber generation of we can't accept a lot of downtime. Like it's really interesting. Like I know, like you're in the Toronto area. Do you remember when Rogers went out for like a day, like
Oh
a
yeah.
couple years ago? And it was like I think it was like 5 hours. Honestly, if it was doubled, if that was 10 hours, I think it would have been the end of the world. Like I think it would have been the zombie apocalypse because I remember so my neighborhood there was a Rogers store and then there was a Starbucks that wasn't on Rogers, and so they still had Wi-Fi. So it went out in the morning. At 9 o'clock, I was driving by the area, and I want to say there was 300 people standing in the parking lot, either trying to get Wi-Fi off the Starbucks or waiting for the Rogers store to open to get some sort of answers that they were not going to get from the Rogers store, and because people just can't handle it when their things aren't working. So they're people like so. I do think it's less, but it is scary because we're so reliant on it, right? Like it's like as a marketer, like I use HubSpot a lot. Like if HubSpot had some sort of and the HubSpot has outages, but the way they build HubSpot is it'll be in sections. It won't really be the whole thing. It'll be this one aspect's out, if all HubSpot went down for 3 days, like I don't have no idea what would happen, right? Like, and it would be a huge loss of money for a lot of people. Like, honestly, it would be the end of some companies, and that part is scary, right? That we're so reliant on it. But I do think the world, the IT world knows this, and there's so much more into it. Like, there used to be like backups are a lot different than they used to be. I mean, you talked about people going back to hardware. I mean, there's remember when people would literally would copy it on a disk and then bring it with them home for the night, or like their backup unit was like just like a thing on their desk next to them that they put their coffee on. Like we're better in that sense. So I think we're protected, but it's scary how much we rely on things. Like if
It is scary. And again, I'm such an odd person, but I love when downtimes happen. For me, it's just a moment to collect myself throughout the
yeah,
day. Because again, when such an on and off world where we're so interconnected, I could care less if the internet goes down. I'm like, whatever, somebody else has got to fix it. I get now, at least an hour or two to myself to go journal, read a book, maybe go out for a little walk, make myself a coffee and enjoy it. I find that, like, with everything being on all the time, I really am craving those moments where something doesn't work because it gives me the time and almost like a permission and excuse to be like, okay, this is a moment for myself now. That Rogers outage was the greatest day of my life. I literally sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and read a book, and I was like, well then. And it was the afternoon, so yeah, it was afternoon that I actually had a glass of wine in case anyone was wondering. But the outage was actually down for the entire day when that happened.
Ooh.
So by the time the outage actually was fixed, it was 6:30 in the evening. So I was like, well then, I guess we just continue drinking and finish this book. And I actually got really into the book and I enjoyed it. But again, it's how people actually really do interact. And it's so crazy how even I tell the story all the time, but there was an incident at my high school where we went into lockdown and I wasn't even in my classrooms. I had to beg to use their phone, and everyone's like, hey, make it a minute long because I've only got 100 minutes. You had 100 minutes and maybe 75 text messages you could send a month, and evenings were free after 7 or after 5 if you were on Fido over here. So those were like precious moments where it was like, okay, you really understood the value of, you know, how much availability we have to us now. And I think I appreciate those a lot more. But I still remember that phone call I made to my mom, and she was like, "What?" I literally used someone else's phone. And was like, "Mom, we're in lockdown. I can't come into school, so don't come pick me up at 3:30. Okay? Can you come at like 4? Maybe we'll be out by then." Okay, bye. And she was like, "What the?" So I wasn't in my classroom, and she's like, "Where's your cell phone?" And I was like, "In the other room," because I was on my way to the bathroom and got pulled into someone else's. But again, in those little moments, to think that even just, God, that was maybe like what, 22, 23 years ago. You couldn't even fathom thinking about unlimited calling then. Look how far we've come. So I think that's all to be said. It really just goes to show how impatient we've grown with technology use as well. I think the scary thing for me is the reliance on AI now to replace critical thinking in a lot of capacities.
Yeah,
It's not there, but I think there's this massive reliance that helps people. It's not going to replace people.
I'm not as scared of it as maybe I should be, and other people have told me I should be, and I know a lot of my friends and fellow marketing people are. You talked about seeing a lot of things the same. We could open up LinkedIn right now, and we could find probably in 10 minutes, I bet you we could find 200 posts that all look exactly the same. That someone threw a prompt into Chat GPT, and it's all supposed to be now about prompt writing, how you write prompts. And it's yes and no. Like I've done that. I've trained my GPT to do certain things, but I still end up changing it because it wants to do it in a certain way that isn't necessarily, right. And so you see this, you see, the emojis in the same spot, the indentations in the same spot. It's the exact same length. Like they all look the same now because people are just putting their prompts and they tell themselves, well, I put my prompt in this way. So I did it better. And it didn't. It looks exactly the same as everyone else's. So I use I use ChatGPT the same way. I remember like when Wikipedia came out when I was in high school, and it was like teachers were so terrified of it and said it was going to replace research and things. But it's a jumping off point, and that's the same way I use ChatGPT. Like it's a huge thing for me. I use it all the time, but I change it massively.
Yeah.
Like when I write in it, like it helps me think, and I use it in that way. So it's not thinking for me. It helps me. Oh, you know what? I should talk about that. But I've had it where I've had it writing blogs, and I've changed 97% of it. Because but it helped me write. So it did help me. It did help me do it faster. But putting in a prompt, even if you think you're this savant prompt writer, it's just not really going to do it the same way as putting in some effort. And a lot of people think it can. A lot of people say you can get rid of the content guy now, and you're not going to. And you said another really interesting thing that what's old is new and new is old and everything's the same. Going back to with AI. What became, getting super techy for a second, what was before AI was robotic process automation. And that was that idea of people writing these little digital workers that would do these very manual, repetitive tasks. So sending out bills and updating email addresses and, just these things that normally people would, data entry type jobs. And, when RPA, robotic process automation, was like kind of at its height, companies were claiming that they saved millions of dollars using it. And I know very real examples where companies would say, we wrote this bot, we reallocated some staff, and we saved $2 million, a year on this. And then 3 years later, they look back at it and they look back at the time that they took editing this and fixing it and looking at outages and everything. That cost them $5 million.
Yep.
So really, they lost $3 million. So I think we're gonna start seeing the same thing. It's you can't just do it and set it and then not look at the benefit of it and not look at what's going in. You have to look at the whole big picture. So yes, AI is great, but it's not gonna really replace things if you want that quality and if you want that thought. And so that's how I look at it as a marketer. It's a tool for me, the same way Canva and a lot of other things are. It's just, but it's on its own. You're not going to get the quality and essentially the business that you want.
Absolutely. And going back to your point about the prompt engineering too, I always find it very funny that marketers are very reliant on prompts. Unfortunately, in marketing, it doesn't work that well. It can give you the basis of great analysis and competitive intelligence and
Yeah.
messaging positioning. However, when it comes to being unique, and I think that's where the uniqueness factor comes in, it's not there. You still
No.
need a human to look at it. I think where prompt engineering is really helpful from a personal standpoint is the data that you put into it. I actually got ChatGPT to revise my budget for a renovation because I literally didn't think I could afford this renovation this year. Unfortunately, I have to. But I actually gave it numbers. And when you start adding more numbers and more details, that's where it shines.
Completely agree. And also, circling back to the marketing world, what do the people want? Right? Like I was thinking of when you were talking about this, like, do you remember when, a couple of years ago when Doug Ford put up that thing of like where you could buy beer on like the May 24 weekend? And people were like, why don't you tell us where I could get a doctor?
Yep.
Like where there's an available family doctor, because it's the same thing. You decided to tell me where beer was instead of where I could not die. And it's because and that's what it's all about, and that's where product marketing comes in, is because what do the people want? Like Rob seems to think people want, or sorry, or whichever one it was, seems to think people want, just to know where what convenience store they can get beer at on the weekend. But that's not what we want. We want other things, and they need that product marketer's approach of going out there, finding out what we need, finding out what we're looking for, what our problems are. Going back to that problem statement. What are the problems, and then talking about it in the right way. And that's what marketing is to me. And that's really, really important. If I was to give, one message with anything of when you're looking at something, it's always, and developers and tech people can struggle with this because they get nerdy and they get excited about something, but bring it back to the problem. Don't just go product right away. Like, what problem are you trying to fix? Like, they'll try to go, oh man, look at this tool, like, like Okta came out, like it was like that was tech porn to people, like they loved it, and they're like, this is amazing, and look at this. But it's like, but what? Let's go back. Yes, it can do a million things, but what problem are we trying to solve, right? And the problem really was, we want to keep things secure without making things complicated,
Mhm.
right? Like, that really was what the problem was at the time, right? Like, I don't want to lose my data, but I don't want to log in 9 different ways every morning when I come in. And that was the problem. And when you understand it that way, it's so much easier to address it. And then you can look at other options, and there's other things. And so that's always the number one thing I think about with product, is always take it back. Don't just go product, and go back, right? Like, what is the core thing that's causing the issue that someone has? You need to understand that. You need to understand why they have that and what that means to them, right? Is that money? Is that time? Is it employees? Like, what does that mean to them? And that's what product marketing is to me.
Absolutely. I want to thank you for your time because this was a great conversation. And I think there's a lot more to explore that you and I could probably chat about forever. I love that, we talked about empowerment of the people, but, and the problem solving aspect of it. I think we've gone through the age of there's enough problems in the world that we can build solutions around. It's almost bringing that human element back into it with the AI conversations, which I think I'm most excited about as a product marketer to see how that gets addressed in the future, because it really is about what do the people want? Is this even working? Because everyone has a vision and a dream and can build a tech solution now, but if it's not doing what it's supposed to do and the people aren't utilizing it, well, I think we all can figure that out as we all move along.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on here, and really, congratulations for doing this format. And one of the things that I was so attracted to being here was, I am so tired of, old white men telling me how things should be. So I love that you're doing this, and congratulations. This is such an awesome thing. And, I wish you so much success with it, because it's really great. I love hearing your opinions, and I can't wait to keep hearing more of them.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate it. I mean, I think we're all tired of being told by somebody, regardless of who it is, what to do. The age of Uber kids over here, even though we're older millennials, we do want change. So let's bring it into the workforce too.
Absolutely. Thank you
All
so
right,
much. This
Matt.
was amazing.
Thank you. All right.
Take care.
Tune in for the next episode, everyone. I promise it'll be another enlightening conversation around everything AI, sustainability, and marketing. Thanks again.